Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see a large example of it to my side today. I talk about tropical houseplants. And today is going to be a continuation of the plant review series, can you tell by the beast of a plant that I've got next to me. And today I'm going to be reviewing the Alocasia gageana Variegata. And I will put in different clips throughout the video because to say this is a large plant is a bit of an understatement. And there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stems in the actual pot itself. And I will try lifting it up, but bear with me because it's a bit heavy. Just so you can see, that is the pot. Yes, there is some leaves that I need to kind of like deal with. But before we do any of that, let's get into some of the ground rules. So for the people that have been here before, welcome back. You know the deal at this point. You can choose if you have a favorite section down below in the progress bar. And for the newbies that are joining, welcome to the slight insanity that is this plant review series. And I will say what I always say, there is no way that I can make this unbiased. It's my review on my plant, growing it in my conditions, which is in a conservatory in the UK, and whatever that might mean, with the care that I would normally give my plants. As always, the reason why I'm creating these videos is to create a bit of a repository for people to comment if they've already got this plant, what they do, if they do things differently to me, if they've had different experiences. Because a lot of the times online, you can find reviews for plant stores or sellers, but very rarely do you actually get true reviews of plants where people have had them for a few years. And if I'm not mistaken, this plant has been with me for either 2 or 3 years. The title, the people who have been here before know that the way that I figure out how long I've had something is by going onto my plant care app, so it will be on the title of this video. But as I mentioned, I will be putting up different clips of close-ups of this plant because it's going to be very difficult for me to bring up and show you every single time. But I thought, because it's large and in charge, I will have it in the shots with me for this one, and you can kind of see it in all of its glory. But yeah, without further ado, let's move into the first topic. So background with this plant is really interesting because I was actually looking for the variegated alocasia. That's the only way that I've ever seen it online. I'm assuming I'll see if I can find the actual scientific name of the specific variegated alocasia that I kept seeing online. And this was a good few years back now, which had white variegation on the leaf. So it was white and green. And I know I kept seeing it a lot of the times in the US. And it was people there that were saying that they could sometimes find it in some, not necessarily at box stores, but some of the plant stores, it wasn't that expensive. They all had great success, even though it was a variegated alocasia. I wouldn't go as far as saying it was stable. I don't think it was necessarily stable, but it was consistent with this variegation. It also grew like wildfire. So I was trying to find that. I couldn't find anything like that in the UK. However, I got my amazing specimen from Turn It Tropical. And Carl, who was absolutely fantastic, he's had a few of these, so it came up. I did snatch it up quite quickly. I know he does have sales that come up on a regular basis if you're based in the UK. I always link some of my favorite plant sellers down in the comments below. And yeah, that's how I was able to get a hold of this beauty. Now, a few things to be aware about this one. It doesn't have the white variegation, so you might be able to see, like at this distance, all the leaves might look green. And I will address some of the crispiness that you're seeing at the moment. This plant sits at the very top of the shelf. There was a point in the summer where I kept bringing it down to water it, but at this point in time, I turn it around, I bring it down every so often just to inspect for pests, but I let it do its own thing. And a lot of the burning that you might be able to see even on this leaf here that looks like it's on its way out, and it is an old leaf that's been there for about a year or two now, has had some scorching from the sun. Anybody who's been in Europe or the UK this summer knows that we had a relatively warm and very sunny summer. So this did take a battering, even though it was under a 90% shade cloth in my conservatory. But I will say the points where there is scorching, and some of it's come off now as well, is because it was also touching that shade cloth. And I would imagine that shade cloth got relatively warm throughout the day, so it did damage his leaves. I mean, they are alocasia leaves, but they're still not on the thick side. It's not like a jewel alocasia, sometimes like, for instance, something from the dragon scale, which has got very thick leaves. This is just a kind of standard alocasia leaf. Now, the variegation on this is Polaroid. So what that means is when the leaf comes in, it might look entirely green, and as it matures and hardens off and it gets exposure to the sun, and I will come back onto the point of light with this one, it will fade down, the variegation will fade down either to a light green or a yellow creamy color. And it does depend on the light. But yeah, I mean, it's to say that it's been easy to grow, you can see the proof is in the pudding next to me. And yes, I know I've got some floppy leaves and I need to chop off. It is still pupping like crazy, and it's in a small pot. But yeah, and that's how it came into my care, and the kind of background a bit on this one. It's moved to different locations with me. It had lower humidity in my previous house and it did really well. I grew it under grow lights, it did really well, but we'll come on to the care and accessories later on throughout the video. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to say about background. Let's move into the next topic. So talking about speed of growth with this one, and this is an interesting one because when I first got it, and it was quite a young kind of pup really at that point, it did take a beat, no more so than any alocasia would do to kind of size up. I had it, and I still do, in my aroid soil mix, and it sized up relatively slowly, but it was pushing out a lot of variegation. I was growing it under LED, I don't even think it was grow lights. And somebody made this comment on a previous video that I did about kind of the best kept secret in the hobby. And they were also saying some of their experiences, and I would agree, I echo this fully. You don't necessarily need grow lights that are marketed as grow lights a lot of the time. I have had great success, and this is one of the success stories. This was just sitting in a lot of my plants, actually. I don't know whether or not you might be able to. I think it might be slightly off camera at this point. Just LED strips, brightest LED strips that I can find, and I get them close to the plants, and it does great. So it does really, really help with kind of giving it the light that it needs without kind of breaking the bank, essentially. But yeah, in terms of speed of growth, however, okay, let's benchmark this. When I had it and it was quite young, I would say if I compare it to golden pothos in the summer, if in the summer the golden pothos will bring out 1 or 2 leaves every month, that one at that point might have brought out 2 leaves every month. When it got bigger, however, and I'm not talking about, actually, yeah, let's talk about it as a full plant. Obviously, there's multiple plantlets in it because it pupped like crazy. The middle stem, so I don't know whether or not you might be able to see, is that from the middle stem? Yes, it is. So that leaf that I'm pushing there is the original mother plant, or the little pup that I originally got. And actually, I don't know whether or not I put a photo in the background section of what this plant looked like when I first got it. I will put it above here so you can see it now. Sorry, it's a bit late, but you know. And it has pupped 6 pups around it, and there's more coming through. To be fair, they could probably get even bushier. I actually removed about 4 or 5 pups, and I gave them away to some friends when I did the local plant swap in my area. And they've since grown them into nice, big, successful plants, as far as I'm aware anyway. But yeah, this plant is one that does grow quite quickly. I will say after it matures, and it's kind of no longer a pup itself, it will kind of be at the same speed of growth as a golden pothos, maybe even slightly faster in the summer. In the winter, this one almost, I wouldn't say, most of my alocasias don't go dormant. So this one doesn't necessarily go dormant for me, but it does slow down considerably. So I might get a leaf every month, every 2 months, depending on how dark it has been, basically. But yeah, that's a bit more on the speed of growth. Let's go into easy propagation. So easy propagation with this one, as with most alocasias, most people, the most comfortable way that most people find is to get, when they're repotting, they'll find all the baby corms in the soil and then propagate from there. I find that that can be quite slow at times. I have mentioned this on other videos. I do swear by the method that I know Emma showed on her channel. So Emma at Good Growing mentioned the shallow puddle method. So do check out her channel as well so you can see what she had to say about that. I don't know whether or not it was her technique, but I saw it on her channel, so I will give Emma the shout out. So yeah, this one is, that's the majority of the ways that I've propagated it is through not necessarily corms with this one, but from pups. So when I was repotting, I removed the pups, put them in some soil, and they will eventually turn into their own plants. That is probably for me the fastest and most fail-safe way of propagating alocasias. However, and I might do a separate video on this when I've got some results, I am trying something different, and a lot of you who have been around for a while and have seen the size of my Alocasia miscalitiana or Alocasia friedegg, and I think I have done a video and I'll link it at the top there. It was huge and it got even larger. And this year I decided to do something drastic with it, mainly because it's become a bit easier to find in the market. So I'm just like, if it goes horribly wrong, I can replace it and I'm happy for that plant to start again from scratch. But I will show you. What I have done, and I don't know whether or not it's going to come up well on screen. No, it is I cut the stems. So I left some of the stem, and I think it might be a rhizome or a pseudorhizome. I'll see if I can put the actual scientific term at the top there. And I chopped it off. I let both sides callus over. The rest of it is still in soil, and it doesn't seem to be dying off necessarily. Whether or not it's going to sprout some more, I think it should do. This is very much me experimenting. And as I said, I don't think I'm the only one who's done this. And if you've had success with this way of propagating alocasia, do please let me know down below, because I'm doing this because I know this works with colocasia. Whether or not this is going to work with the alocasia, I don't know. But essentially, after I've let them callus over, I have now put them in damp pond. And I've got them in a net pot. I've got them in a sealed baggie with loads of humidity. It's not fully sealed, so it can still get some air. I will open this up every few days just to refresh the air in there. And I just want to see if it's going to root out and start growing. The growing tips have been left on there, so there is a potential with some of these. One of these specifically, I did snap off the growing tip just to see if that was going to work. The one thing that I should have done, and I might still do depending if some of the other ones activate, is I might get a cutting that doesn't have the top on it. So it's just like a middle cutting, and see if that does the same. I might wait until spring, summer to give that the best chance of it actually working, but I will keep you posted on this one. Sorry, slight tangent there, but this might be an interesting way that I might propagate that alocasia as well, because it's very similar in the way that it grows. So it grows very columnar. I'm thinking unlike, and yes, to a certain point, most dual alocasias are the same, but they don't get quite as high as some of these kind of more upright alocasias. I'm assuming that's just a standard alocasia form, and the kind of what people sometimes call commonly as elephant ears. And the dual alocasia is just a more compact form of it, basically. So because this one does get that growth point in the middle that can be quite tall, it's a lot easier to chop off. You can see some of the eyes around it and see how it goes. But yeah, I'll put this down and come back to this one. But yeah, in terms of propagation with the gageana variegata, relatively successful. Again, as I said, offsets and tubers both have been relatively successful with this one. Not particularly difficult to propagate, I would say. Soil, obviously, if it's the corms, I'll do Emma's shallow puddle method. And yeah, because I've tried with the corms in damp sphagnum moss, it didn't do that great. Perlite did work, I think, relatively well. I've managed to do that through perlite. Pon, I would imagine it's the same, but I'm still got struggles with pon. I'll come back to you on this one in terms of propagating with pon from a corm. But yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say about propagation. Let's move on to the next topic. So availability with this one, and this is an interesting one because this isn't one that comes up very often. Kind of anecdotally, I will say that this specific plant is the one plant that I've had certain big growers from Indonesia and the Far East reach out to me whenever I bring out a video about it and show its size and all these things, going, we want to give you this much money so we can get a pup of that and send it to us, and then it means that they can kind of generate more and sell more of it. I'm not keen to do that. Yeah, as I said, where I got this from was from Carl. I don't think I've ever really seen, maybe I've seen it crop up once or twice somewhere else, but Carl, at least in the UK at Turner Tropical, is kind of the predominant place where I've seen this come up, mainly because he's got a similar situation to me. He's got a mother plant, it pups out, and he will sell whatever pups there are, and they're all quite small to medium size. I don't think he ever sells anything this large. He might do. But yeah, so it's not the most available thing that I've seen generally. I got this and it was kind of on the high double digits, if I remember correctly, and it wasn't a massively big plant. I don't think the price has dropped that much for this plant. It's not one that everybody desperately wants to have, like the Alocasia miscalitiana, the actual Frydek, which is the variegated form of the miscalitiana. This is one that maybe not that many people know of. It's also got Polaroid variegation, which isn't for everybody. Not everybody necessarily likes a Polaroid variegation. People like that bright white variegation or the creamy variegation. But I will say, for how little fuss this Alocasia gives me, it has a very soft place in my heart, and I think more people should own this. And I would love for it to come down in price actually and become a bit more readily available, because for me and in my experience, I would almost go as far as saying that this variegation is stable. I know it probably isn't, but it's so consistent. Same thing, actually, the irony was I was going for that other white variegated or cream variegated Alocasia, which had very similar kind of growth habit where it was very fast growing, and it was stable variegation, or stable, but consistent variegation, and it did really, really well, and it wasn't a fussy plant for most people. This has been very similar, actually. Just the only difference is that it's got the Polaroid variegation, and I don't know if this is different than the other one because I've never actually seen one or touched one. The leaves of these are kind of rubbery. So yeah, I think it's been a while since I've had kind of more traditional paddle leaves or kind of elephant ear type alocasias, and I can't remember now if all of them are like that, but this is quite a rubbery leaf. But yeah, in terms of availability, as I said, I don't think the price has come down. I don't think they're any easier to find these days. But I think the predominant reason for that is maybe people aren't aware of this, or they want other variegated alocasias more than they would want this one. But yeah, still, I say they're missing out. This is a very, very cool plant. So coming on to pests with this one, and yeah, obviously I'm trying to see if I can find it on here, and I don't know why I'm trying to find it on here. I will probably be inserting a clip. Yes, this does get spider mites on occasion, and I can see, like everybody that knows, mealybugs in here. The odd one or two mealybugs, but generally mealybugs tend to leave most of my alocasias alone. This is also in a place in the conservatory that doesn't have an awful lot of mealybugs. I got a newfangled kind of toy, which is one of those microscope camera things that you connect to your phone. So I have taken some clips of close-ups of mealybugs. They might as well earn their keep in here, basically, and just give me some content as well. But you should be able to see some close-ups of that. And but those are the only two real pests that I've had on this. Have I had thrips on this? Probably not. Have I had whitefly on this? Yes. In the summer when I do get whitefly in here, they are highly attracted to these leaves because when they first come in, I'll see if I can bring one up to show you. I don't know whether or not it's going to come up on the screen. Probably not there, but I will see if I can get some close-up clips so you can see. They do come in like a really bright neon green. So it's the kind of color that a lot of the times the whiteflies are attracted to. So does it really cause this plant at this size any real harm? Probably not. So I kind of try to deal with it so that they don't multiply on this plant and infect everything else. But I just had to learn to live a bit with whitefly in this space. Predominantly, it hasn't really caused too many issues in the conservatory in terms of any plant death or any real plant struggles. but they are a bit annoying. And the fact that I haven't suffered from fungus gnats, I think it's a comic thing that you just like, yay, here's a different flying pest to fly up your nose. Such fun. But yeah, but other than that, I think for an alocasia, it's not too bad in terms of pests. Even the spider mites don't get ridiculous with this one. But as with most of my alocasias, what I will do is a preemptive strike and get the satchels of predatory mites, usually around April or May time, place them in, and generally speaking, I know you're supposed to refresh them a lot of the times, but I found that if I do it early enough and they catch the infestation before it happens, unless something goes weirdly wrong, it tends to mean that that plant is under control for most of the summer. So that's what at least my experience has been. So coming into care for this one, and there's a lot to say on this. So the one thing I will say is you will get the odd occasional floppy leaf if you don't give it an awful lot of light. Now, let's dive into the light issue with this one. So it's really interesting, and that's why I showed you some of the crispy burny leaves here. This one needs as much light as you can possibly give it to give you the brightest levels of variegation, because remember it's Polaroid variegation. So the variegated section, it can, if there isn't an awful lot of light, and again I'll be inserting some clips here, you can see that the variegation is almost indistinguishable on the leaf. In the leaves that have had very bright light, you can see the variegation much more strongly. Now, the other thing I will say is, I don't think no, I'm going to lie. I haven't had a sectoral variegated leaf for a while, but I did have them on this leaf. They are relatively stable in the sense that they won't brown or crisp off very easily. At least that's been in my experience. But yeah, they need as much light as possible, but you do also run the risk of if you give it too much light, you will get burning on the leaves. So it's a bit of a fine balance. I tend to, I've mentioned it again before, this has become one of my feral plants. Love it to bits, but I kind of let it do its own thing. When plants get this established, other than a bit of maintenance and upkeep and making sure that it just doesn't die, I kind of let it do its thing and it seems to be happy. So that's all good. The other thing I will say, and I've mentioned this on several other videos when it comes to alocasias, and I will lift it up again. Oh my God, it's so heavy. You can see the pot is particularly small in comparison to the size of the plant. Whilst I get whacked by an alocasia. And I saw that, and I think it was on one of Summer Rain Oak's videos, and I think she had visited um, some form of either grower, nursery, or botanical center. I cannot remember. And they were showing some massive. So if you think this is big, their allocations were the size of a small tree. And the pots for the size of the plant were absolutely tiny. Now, I'm never going to advocate massively root binding your plant, but they were saying actually their allocations grow bigger and stronger when they're a bit more tightly packed. Does this probably need a repot? Yes. Did this need a repot at the beginning of summer and shouldn't have stayed in the same pot? Also, yes. Am I going to be repotting it next year? I don't know. The issue that I'm having with this plant is I don't really have an awful lot of space to give it so it can get bigger. So yes, I would like to give it in a pot. Do I know that I'm potentially running a risk that this plant might really struggle at some point because it will get that root bound? Also, yes, I know this. But I'm hoping that I've got enough pups in here that if it does go slightly wrong, then I can deal with that. And it's a shame now because I might have left this too long, and having taken it out of the pot to check, the roots are spectacular on this one. Just to give you an idea, even now in the winter months, this is getting watered once every 4 or 5 days. In the summer, this is either every day or every other day. So it really does need a repot. And I would have hoped to be able to remove some of the pups from it and possibly gift them to some friends. But I am so worried because the roots are so wound around it and they've kind of captured in the pups that I don't know how I would do that without decimating or destroying quite a few of those roots of a very relatively large plant, which would most definitely give it some stress. But yeah, as I said previously as well, the other thing that I do with this plant is I do give it those predatory mite satchels at the beginning of the warmer months. And do I give it any special water? No, this gets fertilized weekly every time it's watered, even in the winter, and it seems to be loving life. Most of my alocasias do quite well, and I actually find when you get them to a large enough size, when you get, and I always advocate against a kind of schedule of watering or a routine of watering with most plants, especially alocasias, I found, and I might get some hate for this, with some of my very, very large alocasias, they're quite consistent with kind of watering that they need, as long as you can kind of adjust if you've got a massively warm or sunny day, like a really warm snap in the summer. They tend to like a bit of consistency. People talk about the consistency that you give ficuses. I actually find that alocasias tend to like some consistency as well, especially when it comes to their watering. So yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, most alocasias and colocasias tend to grow around where rivers might be as well. So they are used to slightly more damp conditions. And I think more and more people are aware of this, and they are adjusting their soil mixes in relation to that as well. So yeah. But yeah, I think that's everything I want to say about accessories. You don't really need anything like a janky support stick with this. It's an alocasia. It will grow upright, but this one does spread, as you can see. So by far, I think at this point, the widest plant that I have all around. That's why I also don't necessarily want to give it a bigger pot, because I know it will probably get bigger. And this is one, however, that I will say can be quite an interesting structural one. If you get it large enough, and you just want to have a statement piece somewhere in like the middle of a conservatory or somewhere that you can give it a load of light and make sure that it's obviously watered, and you just want a bit of a statement piece that will take up space and be large and in charge, this is great. You might not get the height, but you'll get the width. You'll get it filling up a space really, really nicely. So something to bear in mind. So let's move on to some final thoughts for this one. So I will do the same thing that I usually do with these videos and say, if I didn't have this plant, but I knew what I knew now, what I know now after owning it for as long as I did, would I be purchasing this? 100%. This is got to be, and it surprised me because it wasn't an allocation that I was necessarily looking for or was aware of. This is definitely one of my top plants, probably one of my top allocations actually. So definitely would repurchase. It just ticks all the boxes. It's interesting, it's got the variegation, it's consistent variegation, not stable necessarily. It has got that extra element of interest as well, because sometimes depending on the light levels and the ones that will come out in the winter, the leaves tend to be very, very green, almost all around, just oh, as if finally reverted back. And then a few days later, you look at it, and it's got a bit of light, and it's just like, oh no, there's like a little fading kind of map of variegation that's happening on there. It's just not bright enough to kind of trigger it so much. So it does create some interest, and that does stay with the leaf, by the way. So if this one is an older leaf, it came out in the slightly darker days. The variegation is very, very dark. You can almost think that this is a fully green leaf, and hopefully, again, I'll be inserting clips so you can see these. But yeah, and then if you get some of the more variegated leaves that are brighter because there were sunnier days, they will be brighter and they will stay brighter. This will be darker and it will stay darker even if it gets sunny days now. So after it hardens off, I don't think it gets much lighter than that, basically. So yeah. And then coming on to scoring from 0, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, where would I score this? And I'll give it 2 scores. I'll give it an alocasia score and I'll give it a kind of overall house plant score. As an alocasia score, I would give this an 8 or a 9. This is a very kind of, as I said, stable plant for me anyway, at least in my experience, and relatively easy it has been for me to care for. I'd be very interested to see comments if a lot of people that see this video have got this plant, and I would really love for you to share your experience down below, because there's very little information about this specific alocasia. At least there wasn't when I was first buying this. So it'd be nice to have even just some extra information down in the comments below. Apologies if, and I do get this sometimes, they're just, oh, you've just added another plant to our wish list. Apologies, but this is a good one to add. I don't feel so guilty with this one because, and again, based on my experience, this has been relatively straightforward. Now, if I was giving this a houseplant score, I would probably score this a 7 or an 8. And the reason why I'm giving it slightly lower scores there is it's still an allocation. And I do know that a lot of people sometimes struggle with allocations. So I don't want to give it a huge score. And obviously it gets wide and it might not be for everybody and you need the space for this. So yeah, those will probably be my scores on this one. But yeah, don't know if there's anything else to say. It's a very, very beautiful plant and I still love it very, very dearly. Years later, that should tell you something. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.